people would say, "What are you up to? What are you doing?" I say, "Well, I'm writing a book about boobs, and I was just spent today I was interviewing strippers." So the thing that prompted me writing the book is that I had a double mastectomy and reconstruction. What did I lose? And then what did I gain? Well, I found that a lot of doctors and gynecologists didn't really have many interesting thoughts about breasts, which is amazing, given they are a reproductive organ and a primary reproductive organ.
Okay, if you were to write a book about breasts, what would the title be?
In American culture, there's this idea that women have breasts to attract men.
Or
Maybe the case nowadays, but it is not true historically, and that's actually a pretty recent phenomenon.
If you were to write a book about breasts, what would the title be?
That is so perverted.
If you were to write a book about breasts, what would you call it?
That is a very interesting French fetish that started with kings in the Renaissance. You do you, girl. Their attitude was like, excuse me, breasts for baby. Like, did he never grow up? You know, he's the most famous topless man in the world. I see man boobs and man nipples everywhere I go.
a little equality.
Equality. Oh my God, I love that.
You mentioned mindlessness TV equating to boob tube in the book.
If you look at the word boob, boob means. So we're
Too.
big on the boba tea. Do you know what boba means?
No.
It means big boobs.
Let's talk about breasts.
Let's talk about you and me
Let's talk about all the good things.
and all the bad things.
Welcome to episode 72 of BoobTube. I'm your best friend, Jaleesa. So we have a special guest today. I can't wait for you all to see who that is. Well, at this point, you probably know who it is. But I can't wait for you to hear from this special guest. But before we get into that, of course, we have to introduce the episode with some BoobTube on the move. So let's see what they have to say.
Okay, if you were to write a book about breasts, what would the title be?
All breasts included.
All breasts included. Love
Mhm.
it. If you were to write a book about breasts, what would the title be?
Tickle bitties.
All right, amen. Have you ever read a book about breasts?
No.
Yeah, no.
If you were to write a book about breasts, what would you call it?
Titty book.
Titty book?
Damn. Oh, I'm trying to be funny. Boobarella.
Boobarella. I love that. If it's Boobarella, it wasn't the evil stepmom that wouldn't let her out. It's probably the husband.
Yeah.
He was like, not with those things.
Not with them
You can't
things.
leave the
Yeah,
house.
that's how I'm
I
going.
like how that goes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so those answers were nothing shy of interesting, and some were kind of expected, some were not. So hope you all enjoyed that. So let's get right into it and bring our guest in. There's a lot for us to talk about, and I can't wait. So let's see what our guest has to say. Okay, so joining us today on BoobTube is Sarah Thornton. She's a sociologist and also the author of the wonderful book, Tits Up. So welcome, Sarah Thornton, to BoobTube.
Thank you so much, Jaleesa. And I must say, Boob Tube is a great name
Thank
for
you.
a podcast, video cast channel.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's dive right in. For those viewers who do not know who you are, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
So, my name is Sarah Thornton. I am a sociologist of culture. I actually did my PhD many years ago on dance clubs and raves
Mhm.
in the UK, like in the days of house music and acid house and techno, when it was like just like running through the club scene over there like a virus. And this was before social media. I mean, how did you get a date? You met them in a club, there was no such thing as, Bumble
Right.
or Tinder. So uh, it's funny, during that time, I was very interested in the body. The dance floor is a really interesting platform for the body, for self-expression, for physicality, for fashion. And I went on to write a couple of books about art and design, which were about people, but not about bodies per se.
Mhm.
And um, I returned to and delved in, let's say, to my interest in the body with Tits Up. Um, the thing that prompted me writing the book is that I had a double mastectomy and reconstruction.
Mhm.
And I was so focused on cancer and worried about cancer that I didn't think too hard about the reconstruction. You know, having implants was covered by my insurance, and is covered by law by anybody's insurance, or I hope everyone's insurance in America, who's had to have one or two breasts removed, or even lumpectomies that disfigure the breast. Um, And so I just went ahead without thinking too hard about reconstruction. But then when I got to the other side of all of this, and I was very lucky, I didn't have to have chemo or um, radiation. It was just lots of atypical cells, ductal carcinoma in situ. And I was just so perplexed. I was like, what did I lose? Like I really was so confused. What did I lose? And then what did I gain? Like
Mhm.
implants are so weird. And also I had the misfortune of having something that happens to a lot of women, actually, is they go in for a breast reconstruction thinking they're just going to get what they had as
Mhm.
close as possible. But I got a breast augmentation at the same time. And that actually is historically pretty common. And I guess some women didn't mind, but I did not want to buy a new wardrobe. And I had some experiences around my top half that made me a bit more of a coverer-upper
Mhm.
than a confident pro-social cleavage gal, as I like to think of them. And I admire that. I'm like, I'm pro-cleavage. But I've never been someone who was that comfortable showing off my own. So yeah, so that's how I got onto the book. I started reading everything I could find about breasts, especially like the kind of feminist literature. Not, there's a lot of, well, let's just say there's some silly, stupid stuff out there about boobs, which is very, demeaning ultimately. And then there's some really serious literature about breastfeeding and serious literature about breast cancer. And then there's a small body of literature around lingerie, the design stuff, which interestingly doesn't touch upon the culture of breasts that much. And
Right.
so as a sociologist of culture, I was like, but it just seemed to me that there was a big gap in the research and writing that I could fill. And that's how I started research by interviewing 55 people, just people who I thought could be experts, bra designers,
Mhm.
um, uh, gynecologists, lactation consultants, um, plastic surgeons. And after those 55 interviews, I kind of had a sense of like how I could plot out the book and who I should um, really focus on for their expertise. For example, I found that a lot of doctors and gynecologists didn't really have many interesting thoughts about breasts, which is amazing, given they are a reproductive organ and a primary reproductive organ. There's this they used to be called secondary sexual characteristics like facial hair, but they're not. They're without boobs, without breasts, there would be no human species. There's no life for an infant prior to
Formula.
formula,
Mhm.
breast milk substitute, as the lactation consultants call it.
Breast milk substitute.
You would die. You would die. And what are the causes of death of infants in their first 2 years is dehydration and infection. And breast milk is the hydrating, immunizing thing that nature has provided us. So, in American culture, there's this idea that women have breasts to attract men. And
Saw that
That may
before.
be the case nowadays, but it is not true historically, and that's actually a pretty recent phenomenon. That that arose in France with the rise of wet nursing, is really only the unused breast, the breast that hasn't been claimed by an infant, that can be fetishized by husbands and lovers. And that is a very interesting French fetish that started with kings in the Renaissance who would have, mistresses young mistresses who wouldn't breastfeed. The wet nurse would do that, and they'd have these kind of like pristine teenage boobs.
Hmm.
And there were actually they would commission portraits of that, which was, there's a whole little subgenre of in Renaissance French painting of mistresses and maybe wives with their, this is amongst the elite, the very elite aristocracy and royalty of the mistress, the children that she's given him, and the wet nurse, all in the same painting.
Wow,
They're fascinating.
that's interesting. I didn't know that that was the origin of that, but it makes sense to me, and I can see it. I can see that being the case.
I mean, I thought of a lot of if you talk to cultures that are, let's say, new to globalization, cultures that have been separated off, and they are fewer and fewer nowadays. But if you look into the anthropological history, there are really fascinating interviews with people about the American sexualization of breasts. Like, for example, this wonderful researcher called Catherine Detweiler did studies in Mali, and both the men and women in the tribe she was studying were like gobsmacked, as the British might say, that like breasts were a key part of like sex life. You know, their attitude was like, excuse me, breasts for babies. Like, who does that, is that man like like, did he never grow up? You know, like there'd be like this, like that is so perverted, like, and it's second nature to us. And in American culture, and it's unfortunate because this kind of male gaze perspective on breasts dominates a lot of women's own experience of their breasts. And so there's very high levels of dissatisfaction in the Western world with that women have with their breasts
Right.
because they're so objectified. And, when you have an objectified body part, you're like, are they too big? Are they too small? Are they too saggy? Do I have enough milk? Do I not have enough milk? There's all these kinds of standards of judgment that are really pretty oppressive.
That makes a very valid point. And we can use this against men and just say that they're the root of the problems. But
Well, it's interesting. Like, okay, so, my mother was a feminist, 1970s feminist, and I always thought I had a kind of enlightened view of like gender. And I've always been fairly body positive. Like, I feel lucky. I didn't have an eating disorder. And I'm pretty average. Like, I was not, I'm 5'5". I'm actually fit into a lot of average categories in America.
mhm,
But I did not think highly of my breasts. I just thought they were dumb boobs that were in the way, and I didn't respect them. I didn't love them. I didn't I didn't think they were worth thinking about. And that's a very common thought. I'm shocked. I mean, I have to, when in the course of writing the book, I would be like, it took me a long time to write. It's a very well-researched book, 5 years. While I was writing it, people would say, what are you up to? What are you doing? I say, well, I'm writing a book about boobs. And I was just spent, today I was interviewing strippers. So, and they'd be like, "Hmm." And then they're like, a lot of women, straight men would be like, hmm.
right.
But a lot of women would be, "Oh, I don't want to read about boobs. I don't want to think about my boobs. I don't want to know." you know, and
Definitely didn't sell them.
yeah, so I mean, I always felt it's so funny the name of your company because my original book, my working title for the book was Uplifting Sagas because I thought I want to tell stories that are make women feel good about their bodies. I want them to be factually accurate. I don't want to be some silly cheerleader book, but I really, there's always a choice to make. When you're looking at the history of Christianity, for example, do
Mhm.
you like focus on the fact that so many women saints were tortured by having their breasts cut off? Like, I'm like, we get enough bad news. I mention it, but like I really focus on like the positive image of the breastfeeding Madonna in the Middle Ages
Mhm.
as I mean, I interviewed the first professor of divinity, woman professor of divinity at Harvard, and who's now in her late 80s, who wrote a book about the lactating Madonna, as she's called. And, as she put it, she said it was a really important image of God's love of humanity. We have like Christ on the crucifix,
Mhm.
and that's a a very interesting and complex image of suffering for humanity. And that is a proof of God, God's love of humanity was such that he sacrificed his own son. That is something that is like super complex, equally complex, but perhaps more positive, as she argues it, is this image of the love, the nutritional, nourishing, nurturing um, image of God's love of humanity, which is the lactating Madonna. And it's interesting. You don't go into every church and see um, Mary nursing Jesus. It's a particularly Italian um, image. It was very popular in the image in the Middle Ages, I think particularly because food was scarce and starvation was a thing. It's but faced with that choice, I go for the uplifting narrative when I can,
Okay.
without being kind of silly about it. You got to deal with harsh facts that, the arrival of breasts also coincides with sexual harassment, incest, sexual abuse, and rape and war. There's a lot of studies that show that when a girl, a young girl receives her bosom. I'm like, I'm not, that's probably not the right wording. But when our breasts arrive, it makes us vulnerable to male violence in many different circumstances. And that's something you can't gloss over. It's actually something that affects Black girls in particular who are more likely to get breasts at a younger age. And you're a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old. What do you know about that world of like navigating male predators? You know what I mean? At
Yeah.
least you don't get your boobs till you're 14 or 15 or whatever. You're like just that little bit older to be able to handle it.
Now it's like
And
go back to that first, like your budding experience. So I could see it leading to the self-hate and stuff of like, oh, once these things came in, this started happening. So then it sticks with you for life.
yeah, and you displace that fear and shame onto your own body part
Mhm.
rather than on to
The purpose,
the the person or the social system that led to your vulnerability,
right?
victimization, and yeah, so we I mean, I was surprised at how many issues and social issues that I had to grapple with in depth using breaths as my starting point. So the chapter is divided into 5 sections, 5 chapters. I wrote a book called 7 Days in the Art World, and I sometimes joke that this is 5 days in the titty world. And because breasts don't mean one thing,
Right.
they mean different things in different contexts, and context is so determining. So I open up the book after the introduction, which involves some history and autobiography. I move into chapter one called Hard Working Tits. And that's set in a titty bar, in a strip club, historic strip club here in San Francisco. And because I thought, who's really going to offer me real insights into the sexualization and over sexualization of breasts? It's going to be sex workers. You
Right.
know, if you're up there stripping and you're like, moving your body in ways that entice and actually make money, if you've commodified this part of your body, then you got to know a few tricks.
Right.
And you got to have a lot of interesting strategies and insights into the way breasts are an appetizer and an advertisement for other sexual services, like a lap dance or something more, um, uh, I'm not sure what word I'd use there, but something more elaborate.
Mm.
And, and then chapter two, I go to like a very different place. I thought, how can I make breastfeeding interesting? I breastfed 2 children, and I felt it was my duty. And I eventually became very productive, like Milk Factory. But I don't think I ever allowed myself to enjoy it, to feel the beauty of it, to really bond over it. I think I was fearful of that. I think partly it was the feminism in my brain that was like, oh my God, I can't lean into this mother thing too much because I'm gonna become a slave to my children, for lack of a better word. Like I'll become a servant, to the species rather than my own autonomous woman. And so, so I revolve around the oldest human milk bank in America, which is just a fascinating thing. And I interview a lot of high capacity donors, as they're called. So women who often are on their second or fourth child, and they have a lot of milk, and they donate milk to the milk bank to provide it for premature infants in the NICU. Because what is not so well known, unless you have a premature infant in the family, is that formula can be extremely dangerous for them. It can lead to death. It can lead to developmental disabilities. That's a very common problem with premature infants, and it relates to their guts.
Mhm.
So human milk is really important to the health of children born before term. And, there's so much evidence that it's really important the first 3 months, and actually important for the first year if you can manage that, if that suits you and you can do it. And I'm like, believe in a woman's right to choose
Mhm.
whether they breastfeed or not. And I try to reserve judgment about women's choices of all kinds. Braless, push-up bra, minimizer, you do you, girl. I'm like,
Yeah.
or and even in the areas where people get super judgy, which is like breastfeeding. Women themselves, let alone men, can be like really judgy about the way other women do it. Oh my God, that baby's 2 years old, like, and she's still breastfeeding. Or, oh my God, she like breastfed for one day. Like, whatever it is, I'm like, I do not know people's circumstances. I am
Exactly.
in a position to judge. I'm just like, there's way too much judgment about women's bodies, so much more than men's bodies. I mean, honestly, I walk around and having researched the book, I see man boobs and man nipples everywhere I go.
Of
I
course.
mean,
Yep.
those man nipples are everywhere. And nobody comments and nobody even notices them. They're like beneath consciousness. And in many environments, if you've got like nipples on display, whether you're wearing a very thin bra or you're braless or you're wearing, Kim Kardashian's like nipple bra. There can be a lot of comment, a lot of negative comment, and a lot of judgment. And I'm like, honestly, I would like women's nipples to just be what they need to be when they need to be it, and have the same privilege as male nipples. You know,
A little equality.
equality. Oh my God, I love that. I,
Do
I'm writing that down because
it.
honestly, I love a I love a pun and a bon mot like that, and somehow I missed out on equality.
It's fine.
I see myself as a titspert.
Titsper. I love that.
I know you must have a lot of titspertise.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I like Titsper. That one I'm gonna add myself.
And
Okay.
so
Um,
if I finish, just I don't want to bore you, but like just chapter 3 is about plastic surgery. That's called Treasured Chests. Chapter 4 is my bra chapter, which is set at the offices of Old Navy because they actually have a really big business in sports bras, swimwear, and recently construction bras. And that chapter is called Active Apexes
mhm.
because, as I'm sure you know, Jaleesa, but many others might not know, is you would, God forbid, never mention the word nipple in a corporate environment. They're referred to as apexes and have been for like since the 50s at least. So active apexes is kind of a play on active wear, sports bras, and this thing we can't talk about called apexes. And then chapter 5 is called Holy Memories, and that is set in the redwoods during summer solstice with a pile of neo-pagan kind of hippie nature worshipers. And they become my avenue into understanding the relationship between breasts and religion. Because I think one thing that came up early in my research was that the Abrahamic religions, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, were a big part of our women's experience of their own bodies in America. Yeah. Garden of Eden has a lot to answer for. Because it's interesting, the tree of knowledge, they ate an apple, and what did they learn? Well, interestingly, when you go back and read it, you're like, wow, the big learning at that moment anyway is cover up.
Right.
It was about shame. It was like about, and it's interesting, the early interpretations of that were just cover up the loins. And you see many depictions of Adam and Eve in the garden, the earliest ones, and they're both topless or top free.
Mhm.
And but then later when there's a bit more of a sexualization going on, you'll see like things going on like this in the paintings.
Right.
And anyhow, yeah.
Mhm. Well, those are things to think about. I hadn't thought about that part, but once you started to talk about it, it made perfect sense. I could see it. I was like, oh yeah, of course. So, you did cover some of the questions I had. Um, I will say one of the other questions, just because we are here on BoobTube, is that you mentioned mindlessness TV equating to BoobTube in the book. So, in honor of this being BoobTube, just asking if you could give some details on that.
Well, I'm really interested in language
Mhm.
and the history of language and what it reveals about culture. I find like words for me are like evidence.
Right.
And so when I started research, I used two words, boobs and breasts. Those are the only words I used to describe this part of my body. And then when I started doing research, I was like, wow, men use a lot of words.
Right.
They're like, not necessarily to me, but between themselves. There's a lot of vocabulary in operation there. And then I read this amazing article, this study that found that there are 700 words in the English language to describe breasts,
Wow.
and most of them are used by men, like tits, jugs, hooters,
Mhm.
knockers. And they're having fun with it. And I thought, and then through research, um, I discovered too that, like, while white women in America tend to say breasts and boobs, and of course, black women will say breasts and boobs too, there is also, especially in the South, the word titty, which is a common word, which I happen to like way more than boobs.
Welcome to Texas.
Yeah, titty world. I just think it is a more affectionate term, and a more body positive term than boobs, because if you look at the word boob, boob means idiot.
Mhm.
And you have booby traps and booby prizes, which are actually for losers.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, why is it that, and also in England, in the UK where I lived for many years, boobs is like the dominant word too. So I thought, why is it so many English language speakers are using this, referring to their breasts as idiots? And the boob tube is interesting because I love the way you've appropriated it for your channel. So boob tube, I don't know when it arose, maybe in the 70s, and it referred to like dumb, mindless television.
Right.
You know, you're a couch potato watching the boob tube.
Mhm.
And so I love the fact that you've reappropriated it for our breasts.
Mhm.
So what, and then I just started thinking and I thought, I think it would be important for women to try to reclaim words that they feel comfortable with. And the word tits was not a word I was initially comfortable with. It did not roll off my tongue. I associate it with pornography, and I was like, it didn't feel right for me to use it. But then when I was doing research in the strip clubs, I'm sorry, those are not breast bars. And if you're talking to people, tits is the word used, including by the dancers themselves.
Mhm.
And um, I then started thinking um, I started thinking a lot about the word tits, and it is the number one word used on the internet for women's top half.
And then I remember you mentioned it being the phrase that was used by drag queens for kind of like the break a leg equivalent.
Well, that's related to tits up. So the
Right.
reason I ended up calling the book Tits Up is because it's a kind of womanly appropriation of the word tits. So it is a showbiz term, um, that one woman might say to another, one chorus line gal might say to another as she goes on stage, tits up, honey, like break leg. And I also discovered in the course of doing my etymological research that it was used in the 60s by drag queens who would say it to one another. Tits up, honey. And so tits up seemed to me like a sisterly appropriation of the word tits, which has kind of become a man's word. The
Right.
other thing to say about the word tits is it's really old. The word tits is probably 1,000 years old. It was originally synonymous with teats, and it likely derives from the Proto-Indo-European tata. Believe it or not, the word tata is like 5,000 years old. So I thought, look, word has been around for millennia, and it's the number one word on the internet. I gotta try to use it in a way that I feel comfortable with. And so tits up became a way of kind of like my version of appropriating a term. And I think that I really believe in appropriation. I really admire the way the African American community has reappropriated the N-word. I think like,
Mhm.
yay, you
Yeah.
know, and the gay community too. Uh, Gay was not a positive, weirdly, for a while. Queer, there's a poofter, like there's, the gay community has always been pretty quick to appropriate words like calling each other faggot or whatever. I feel like I can do that because I'm married to a woman. But the uh, and it is my tribe in a way, you know. Uh, so tits became a word I thought was really important. And because tits is the kind of most eroticized version of breasts, I use that for chapter one, hard work and tits. So another slang word that I have come to love is the word jugs. There are very few slang terms in the English language that honor the hydrating, nourishing function of our breasts, which is their biological evolutionary reason for existing. And this is not the case in other cultures. In Chinese, the number one slang word is actually the equivalent of milkies.
Mm.
And I was astonished to discover the actual translation of boba tea. I don't know, is boba tea big in Houston?
Think so, kind of. I mean, it's a thing for sure. It's not really my thing, but I know there are some boba places that have popped up around and stuff like that. So I would pretty much say it's big. Maybe it's bigger there, but it's still
Yeah,
a
we have a big Asian community here, so we're
too.
big on the boba tea. Do you know what boba means?
No.
It means big boobs.
And
Big
that's why it's
boob
big, the little big round balls in boba tea.
Well, no, I think it comes from the milk.
Oh,
So
that's
basically, because boba tea has milk in it, it used to be called the equivalent of pearl tea, which referred to the little tapiocas. And then a Hong Kong entrepreneur who was in love or a big fan, let's say, of a porn star there, developed a brand called Boba Tea. You know, like just like we refer to Kleenex, it's actually a tissue, or, you know, in Britain they talk about Hoovers when they mean vacuum cleaner. Boba is this brand that then became synonymous with the product itself. And it means big boob. And it's weird. If you go on Chinese Wikipedia, it'll tell you that. But on English language Wikipedia, it doesn't, you're like, doesn't tell you what boba means.
interesting.
Yeah. So jugs, I feel like it's a very personal thing. I just encourage women to branch out, you know, to reclaim words that they find fun. And I kind of thought it was kind of fun to imagine one breastfeeding mom talking to another breastfeeding mom about their jugs.
Mhm.
And, you know, and I'm not a prescriptive person. But I just feel like it's great to feel more comfortable in ourselves. And sometimes using and appropriating uh, words that are used in the common culture, but not so much by women is a good thing for us to do.
I get
It's a
it.
way of hope, like the final chapter, sorry, the conclusion of Tits Up is called Towards a Liberated Rack.
Mhm.
And, you know, rack is another word that I've come to use and not find, um, you know, it doesn't stick in my throat or anything. I mean, for as a sociologist of culture, I think of a rack very as like something you hang baggage on. And
Mhm.
I feel like, or clothing, you know, there's a lot of our breasts, there's a have a lot of cultural connotations. And so rack for me evokes that complexity in a way. Um, and it's not a word that I mean, there's some words I really don't like. A lot of the food metaphors I'm not that fond of. Like, you know,
Melons.
pardon?
I said like melons.
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, that's like a dumb fruit. It's not the way they feel, it's the way they look. You know, like jugs is not a visual metaphor. They don't look like jugs per
Right.
se, but they are conceptually they're jugs.
Right. Milk.
Also, I also don't pass judgment. If melons springs to mind and that works for you, and you feel like maybe you got some melons, bless you. You know what I mean? Like I had more like the apple variety. But the oh yeah, so I I think it's all about one's own comfort zone. I
Right.
okay, there's a British term, fun bags.
Well,
Like
with
for
that.
me, I just think that's kind of ugly. But you know what? If you want to use it, fine. I'm not, you
Okay.
know,
Cool.
it's a personal thing. What words work for me? And I use now, I mean, probably about 10 words or even a dozen words now when I only used two before. And it is actually weirdly liberating. I feel like I've branched out. It's an odd psychological thing, you know? Um, and I lived in the UK for a long time and I kind of like knockers. I don't have a problem with knockers. You know, it's I think when I was a kid, I used to love those toys that were called knockers. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean? They were like two balls that knocked into each
Yeah,
other.
a
Yeah,
throwback.
I mean, I feel like there's kind of fun, like there's fun and harmless. There's significant. Like for me, jugs has almost become a significant reclamation of the lactating function, you know. Chests, I think chests is a beautiful word. It's um, partly because we have treasure chests, and chests are things that hold important things like lungs and hearts or gold.
Right,
And so I'm like, I like the value, you know, the upscaled value in the word chests. And
right.
I like the fact that it's, you know, works for all genders and all shapes and sizes, you
Sure.
know. And, you know, in San Francisco in particularly, we have a very large queer community here. And honestly, it's hard to keep track of the pronouns and things. And, you know, I sometimes I'm in a situation where I think chess is the right word to use because I might make a mistake. You know, there's a long history, let's say, of lesbians wearing uh, you know, bandeau to flatten. You know, now the sports bra or the minimizer can do that. But, you
Right,
know, there were days where breast binding was a thing
right.
in the lesbian
Being in
community.
some old movies.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was so interesting because in China, breast binding and in Japan, breast binding is a long-standing thing because breasts were not eroticized over there in the same way. And if you look at a photo of a geisha, you will see her chest is like zeroed out. I
Mhm.
mean, yes, Asians in general, just genetically speaking, are more likely to be an A cup, but even so, that A cup was flattened even more.
Yeah,
And it had to do with their ideals of beauty, which are so different from the European or African ideals.
right. So, one of the questions I had to was about something you stated. This one was more so on your site, and it says, as long as boobs are disparaged as shameful and stupid, women will remain the second sex. So, do you think that Tits Up is helping to make women the first sex, or just level it out to where it's equal, a little equality, and there's no first or second sex?
I am a fan of equality. I don't want to be the first sex. That seems like a unpleasant place to be. And I don't really understand why men want to be there either. I
Ego.
I I cherish the loving um siblinghood of equality and I really do believe that the fact that our chests are considered profane and men's chests are natural, normal, emblems of our humanity, um, is a big problem. It is an indicator of how far we have to go to be considered equal. And I think particularly in a society, in a country where women have so few rights over their own bodies, that shifting our mindset around the top half is an important thing to do. I actually feel like you know, the feminist movement, the women's movement really focused on uteruses, wombs, and vaginas for good reason. Lots of really important reasons to do that. But the fact that we haven't really done consciousness raising around the top half, you know, now may be the time that that it would be helpful to do that.
This is
And
why we're here.
yeah, I mean, I think again about religion because, who's the most famous topless man in the world? I ask you. Who's the most famous topless man in the world?
In the world or
In America and Europe.
oh, okay. I was like, are
Right. Yeah.
because
And
you
possibly in Asia, but like I think there's somebody else who rivals him in Asia. Um, yeah, so I would say all of the Americas, North and South, and Europe, the most famous topless man.
is it I two come to mind. I can think of Jason Momoa it,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that comes up.
I also think of Terry Crews because he's known for, making his chest move like that. Um,
It's interesting. Like some people say Arnold Schwarzenegger, other people say like
in.
Putin, Vladimir Putin, because he was topless on a horse.
Yeah.
Honestly, hands down, the most famous topless man is Jesus Christ.
Okay, that's what I was like. I was like, are we thinking like in the Bible or like on earth currently? That's why I was
You
thinking
know,
that at first, and it was like, okay, so let me name some people that I
so
know.
it's really that is interesting to me because that's a sacred chest. That is Christ's chest is an emblem of his universality, his humanity, his authenticity, his honesty. So how is it that a man's chest, even if it's a very important iconic figure, um, how is it that a man's chest can have that symbolism and that sacredness, and then here women have a profane top half, so profane that we have to cover it up, and then
Mhm,
we're embarrassed by it, and
mhm,
it's shameful. A man's chest is not shameful. And I feel like shame is a very, very powerful thing. It's like we can talk about laws and then we can talk about culture. And in culture, shame is debilitating. It's like it is kind of has is a it's like a psychological right not to feel shame, or to feel proud. And I I really admire when women are proud of their chests. But they're few and far between. I
right.
think in my experience, women who are truly proud of their chests, and I know some, and like honestly, I think of them as out and proud. Um,
Got it.
and and but I'd say like 75% of the female population is not experiencing that joy.
For sure. And I mean, I see it all the time in my line of work, and that's part of why it's called uplifting because you do have women that are like, "Oh, I just hate these things," or "Man, this one is just crazy," or "It just does its own thing," and this is my little this boob, and that is it's like, and I have to try to tell them that the words matter for one. And then
Yeah,
two is like you're not really thinking of it as a negative, but when you think about it, it's not a positive. So you have to try to retrain your brain to be on a more positive side. Like, no, this isn't your crazy boob. This one is just the boob that's larger than the other. And everyone has one breast that is bigger than the other. So
yeah,
and they're like, "Oh, I just thought I was weird or this and that." I was like, "No, you're not. This is a thing." And then even when people have a larger difference between the two cup sizes, that's
yeah,
also a thing, the breast asymmetry, and you're not alone there either. So it's just always it comes with the education, of course, but a lot of women, of course, aren't even thinking about their breasts like that to take the time to realize that they're using negative terms to describe their breasts or feeling negatively towards their breasts. Like, oh, I just wish I could chop these things off. And, I might go lay on the table and I hear all sorts of things. So it is a process of having to shift the brain and get us to that more positive space
yeah.
for our
And
breasts.
I do think bras can help. I mean,
Yeah.
there's the myth that feminists were bra burners. And of course, in 1968, they did throw bras into a freedom trash can outside the Miss America pageant. Um, and there was no bra burning that day, but it became a kind of symbol of how crazy are these ladies, you know. Um, I mean, I don't, my mother didn't wear a bra in the 70s for a while. Like that was a fashion. She happened to be a teeny little, she had such a teeny bosom. She didn't need
Right.
one anyway. But, you know, um, the, I feel like bras can be a very important uh, way of reclaiming and feeling positive about your bosom. And I love colored bras. I'm really into like my mauves and oranges and pinks, and I wear beige bras, but I don't love them. I never feel excited putting on a beige bra. I'm like, you know, to be this is so thick, I probably didn't have to put it on, but and
Right.
sometimes I'll wear a turquoise bra underneath a white shirt just because it's fun. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. I think that cherishing bras can be part of cherishing a bosom. I mean, honestly, bras cost a fortune
Thank
compared to
you.
like underwear or, you know, other sweatpants. And I do I don't know. I just feel like there's different ways to kind of reclaim symbolically. And like words are one and clothing is another. And you know, hence my t-shirt today.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I only wear this for certain occasions because
It's a
I'm
special
60 years old and people will think I'm absolutely off my trolley.
and let them think
Um, but I'm willing to go there, let's say.
that's good. It's like you said, just shifting to that liberation and to each his own in all their different ways. Now another thing that you mentioned, you talked about the insurance. You started off talking about that with your own experience. And again, there's so much in the book that I would love to mention. Like, oh, did you know this? Did you well, like for the viewer's sake, to be like, did y'all know this? Did y'all know this? And like the puppies and the mastitis and all these different things. But I know I can't like read the whole book, then I'm gonna become the narrator for the audiobook all of a sudden.
There is an audiobook.
Yes,
I read it, and my sister is an ex-actress, and she's usually pretty scathing about her older sister, and she said I did a good job. So just a little plug for the audiobook.
perfect, perfect. And I actually did use listen to the audiobook. So
Thank you.
the question for the insurance is that in discussing insurance companies after mastectomies, you mentioned there's no federal right to breastfeed or to obtain an abortion, but we have the right to fake tits. So, how do you think, which again, that's something that no one's really thinking about. Like, oh, wow, you got, I'm thinking about it. We have movies like John Q, where the little kid couldn't even get the insurance to live. And then we have all these people with all these medical concerns and you think about it when it comes to our breasts, it's like, wow, like we don't have these rights and stuff, but we can get the implant. So it was just like, wow, when you think about it and put it into perspective, it's like that's some things that make you go, hmm. So
It's
how
the
do you
surprise that keeps on surprising me.
right?
When I kind of put that together, I um I felt great shock. And every time I say it, I have that frisson of like what a weird world America is.
Right.
You know, and it has to do with a lot of things. So the 1998 uh, Women's Health and Cancer Act, or I might be fudging up the title, but the 1998 Women's Cancer Act, which was federal law, basically insists that implants are provided and reconstructive surgery are provided to women who lose their breasts
Mm,
due to cancer or another ailment. medical reason. And it it was a bipartisan, passed bipartisan, and actually it was a Republican, weirdly in New York, where I don't even know if they have exactly that kind of Republican in New York anymore, um, who really swung the vote. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one thing is that implants make Allergan and Johnson and Johnson a lot of money. And the implants are the driver of the plastic surgery business because 90% of plastic surgery is on women, and breast surgeries of all kinds are the most popular surgery. So although implant sizes are going down, and so augmentations are actually not on the rise in our culture anymore, um, there's a lot of other surgeries going on, lifts, reductions, and things like that. So it it says a lot about what men think about women's bodies, about what should be a right, that we
Right.
should have the right to fake tits. And it also says a lot about like capitalism in business. You know, lactation and breastfeeding arguably is a competition for the formula business.
Right.
And it's very hard to get all those individual mothers and to quantify the value they contribute to the economy, let's say. Um, it's very, and, let's just not talk about our choices below the waist.
Of
I
course.
mean, let's just say that is outside my area of expertise. Although I do have my own values that I'm sure you can assume that I'm sure you know.
Right.
Anyhow, um, yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you think that we can help to shift the cultural perceptions of women's bodies to influence the way that laws are created or interpreted regarding reproductive rights and body autonomy? I know it'll be a
That is a huge question.
I know, and I know
That is,
it'll take a while, but we have to start somewhere to get it going. I feel like as a society, we have, in a sense, like we've been rising
yeah, yeah.
and liberating. So I feel like it can get there, but it's definitely going to be a long game.
I'm with you 100%. I mean, we are in a period of terrible backlash and it's brutal, but this is not the future. This is a moment in history, and we will come out the other side. I choose optimism. For my mental health. I got it. I have to.
Right.
And um, so, I mean, from the, I think the thing is sometimes you can't win one battle, but there are other little battles you can win. And, you know, I feel like fighting for the right to breastfeed is relevant for all women, even women who do not have children or never want to have children, because it is partly about the right of a woman to expose her breast in public.
Right.
And not even that much of it, frankly. You
Right.
know, I loathe those porta potty looking things they have in airports that are for
Yeah.
women to go into to um, nurse their child. I mean, honestly, that should be a seat right at the front next to the gate. They should have like literally a seat saying reserved for nursing mothers.
Right.
You know, there's like got to be a total about face to uh, the way we think about our top half. So, I think just individual women reflecting is helpful at this stage of the game, especially possibly for the next 3 years where, we got to kind of regroup rethink, get ready for our the next moment. I mean, in certain situations and certain constituencies, like there's another battle coming in 1 year. But yeah, so
It
I'm
seems
not
like
a political scientist.
Mhm.
And I'm actually only recently an American. So I became an American citizen only a few years ago, and I voted for the very first time last November. So
Congrats.
I am the wrong person, perhaps, to really offer deep insight into that question. But what I do understand from a cultural point of view is that we have incredibly deep, rich, fascinating chests. And the more we respect them and appreciate them, perhaps we can respect womanhood because they are emblems of our womanhood. They're not just any old body part, they're kind of the equivalent of um, a W on the ladies' room door. You know what I mean? Like they're symbolic of us. And
Yeah.
and they become ever more symbolic, amongst youth too, because on college campuses all over America, gender is being redefined as, how you present yourself.
Hmm.
You know, it doesn't matter what's in your pants. It's like, what's your affect? What's your, what do you see?
Yeah. I think that it's funny to think about it, even like you said, the porta potties in the airport. And I was like, I guess that's society's way of meeting women halfway in a sense, because it's like, oh, we're saying that it's acceptable to breastfeed in public, but because we over sexualize breasts as a society, we're going to give you a private space to do it because, yeah, so that way you can do it and you're still in public, but you're covered up
Well,
because it's
I don't, personally, I do not see that as being in public. I think that reinforces the idea that breastfeeding should only be done in something that feels like a toilet. I mean, a windowless room. I,
right.
I mean, I guess because I lived in the UK where it is actually was in my day easier to breastfeed in public, I did not feel, I did feel like I had the right to breastfeed. And I actually think there are laws in the UK that protect breastfeeding women from harassment. And that is a real problem. If you're sitting, let's say you got two kids, you're in the park, one of them's on the slide, and the other one you're sitting on the park bench and you're breastfeeding your infant. That's like a perfectly natural place to be. And then some asshole walks by and harasses you. That's against the law in
Yeah, of
some countries, but not in America.
course
And
not.
you know what I mean? Like you got to be able to honestly, call over the policeman on the beat and say, talk to this guy, please. Give him a hard talking to, get him to stay in his lane. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, or whatever. And also it comes from women too. We're anyhow. That's so I don't think that's a very good answer to your question. That's like a few random thoughts, but it's something I want to think about more, and I'd like help thinking about.
But I'd like to say, I think that every one of us in the breast world, as I call it, we're all making strides towards that. It like little by little, fighting little battles and everything. So for every person that is doing anything to help when it comes to breast, whether it be a product that is to solve a problem or a book to help you, think about breasts and learn about breasts in a different way, or boob tube to give all this information about breasts and help it to not be such a taboo topic, or people that are working with breast asymmetry, like everything, every guest we've had and everything, I feel like is making those necessary steps. And like you said, this isn't the future. So we'll see, we have these small battles and that we are conquering over time, and we're just going to see where it gets us. And 20 years from now we can look back and be like, I was doing some of the work that helped us get to where we are today. So yeah, we will.
So
uh
true.
uh that sounded kind of like my a little word of positivity spill, but I always like to ask the guests if there's something that they can leave our viewers with, some words of positivity.
Well, I think women are lucky to have this life source um, as part of their body, whether they use it or not. And um, I feel the privilege in it, but I never used to.
Right.
And it does take a reset, a
Yeah.
reset. And also, I think just a lot of information helps.
Yeah.
Just like lots of examples
For
of, of how they can be empowering and how historically they have empowered.
right.
And yeah,
Alrighty. Well, again, thank you so much for all of this greatness. Um, of course, people can look up your book, Tits Up. Can you tell us where they can find you, website, socials?
um, yeah. So you can buy the book on Amazon. And you can buy the hardback, which is currently cheaper than the paperback, although the paperback has my preferred subtitle, which is The Top Half of Women's Liberation.
Love it.
And the audiobook is on Audible and audiobooks. And also, I think a lot of libraries have it. So,
Okay.
that's an option. And then me, I am an kind of lazy social media person, but I'm on Eyes, as in the things you see with Eyes Thornton.
Okay.
It's my tag on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on Twitter, as I prefer to call it. Um, uh, you know, yeah. So, and then my website is www.sarah-thornton.com. And that's, articles I'm writing and things like that. I've got to write an article for the Financial Times on about breasts on the runway and the red carpet, which is what I'm going to be doing today,
Yeah.
is trying to write that up.
It's always work to be done. The Lord's work, as I call it. All the breast work that we do, call it the Lord's work.
Yeah, or the goddess's job.
Yes.
Totally agree.
Okay, so again, thanks for joining so much. Couldn't wait to do this since the moment that I heard about the book. So I'm so glad that I was able to have this chat with you and share it with all the BoobTube viewers because, like I said, it's work that needed to be done. So it's important information to get out to the world for sure. So for sure, if you haven't read Tits Up for all the viewers, make sure that you get it or listen to it on Audible and listen to Sarah's lovely voice read it for you. So yes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jaleesa. Thanks to all of you viewers.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our guest just as much as I did. It was such an honor to be able to have this interview with Sarah Thornton. And if you haven't already, please go out and get Tits Up. It's a very interesting read. It really makes you think about breasts in a different way. So it's so great for her to put out a book like that. It's everything that we all needed in this breast world. So be sure to check out Sarah Thornton. Make sure that you check us out at bootubepodcast.net. You can shop merch and more. And be sure that you tune into us next time. We're going to shift the focus over to our health for the next episode. So make sure that you join us. Adios.